Good evening. All throughout this country, there seems to be a word that really describes what some people have gone through, and that word is segregation. Segregation is the action or state of setting someone or something apart from others, from people. Sometimes it's even meaning that it's enforced separation of different racial groups in a country, a community, or even an establishment. Tonight, I have a wonderful guest that's going to be joining us. He's a former state coach. He's the mayor pro tem of the city of Bishopville, South Carolina. He's a retired high school principal. He has even taken part of the protests during the segregation in the 1960s. My guest tonight, and to my viewing audience, help me welcome Mr. Ennis Bryant Sr. to Real Talk with Jean Price. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Good evening.
Thank you for joining us again tonight on Real Talk. It is a pleasure to have you with us. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I first of all, I thank you for having me on the show. I'm honored, very honored. I am originally from a small town called Clinton, North Carolina. Grew up sharecropping um, and completed high school there. Went on to Fayetteville State University, where I first became involved with the movement. And since that time, after graduating, uh, went to work in different places, ending up here in Bishopville, South Carolina. But during that time, those as you were scrolling through some of those scenes, it brought back some memories to me from the times that we spent at Fayetteville State University, and the things that we went through. And so I'm so honored to be here, and I thank you and uh, the Benjamins, our kids, that they put this together.
Yeah, I'm grateful. Mr. Ennis, Mr. Ennis, I'm sorry, Mr. Bryant. What was
Yes.
it like? I'd like to call you your last name. I'm sorry. What was it like? We know we're facing here in America in 2021. As I was even looking at some of the pictures, of course, I was born in 1966, but I know that was a time when my mom was, involved with that, in the 60s. What was it like? It was, watching those pictures, for me, it was amazing. But what was it like in everyday living?
Well, it was like you sort of knew the rules and you adhered to them without question, and until, in my case, until I began to learn some of the history of the things that we had endured in the Middle Passages and all that. But it was not taught in our high school, and I believe that. As a matter of fact, when I first started to learn about African American history, the real history, it was my senior year in high school when our principal, Mr. O.A. Dupree, told the seniors who were going to be graduating at the Christmas time that they were to come to the schools, those who could walk and come to the school during that holiday break. And we thought that we were going there to learn about what we called at the time occupations, which meant that they were going to teach us about how to get jobs and things like that, as other senior classes had done in the past. But when we got into the class, we found it very, very different. It was a Black History class, and at the end of the class, we had to write a paper that was going to be judged by Mr. Dupree about what we had learned and how we felt about the things that we had learned. The title of my paper was "Shaking Off the Chains of Slavery."
Mm,
I
wow.
wrote that paper. It had to be reviewed by some of the faculty. Mr. Daniels was my advisor, and he was the first one to review it. And then Mrs. Merritt was also one of those who reviewed the paper. And I kept it for years. I had it a long time. Mr. Dupree was impressed with it. I having no idea that I would ever be involved in anything like a demonstration, but that's sort of where it got started. I learned things about my own family history, and I learned things, about the African American history as far as the struggles. Now we knew about George Washington. I think there were about three that were mentioned, usually in one paragraph or less. George Washington Carver, and people like that. But the depth of our history was not being told to us, and I don't think it's being told even now.
Mhm.
But that was the spark for me. So when I got to Fayetteville State University, the demonstrations had already begun in Greensboro, the Greensboro Four, the young men who sat down at the lunch counters in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I was enthused, and not only myself, a lot of other kids. Our parents didn't even know we were demonstrating. they we didn't let them know, and it was nobody said anything about it. So we kept demonstrating until one day we were downtown demonstrating, and one of my classmates who graduated from high school with me, uh, they took her picture and put it on the front page. So that the cat was out of the bag after that. But it was an interesting time. Those of my generation, sort of get emotional when we think about it because of the things that we had to endure. But it was as far as the segregation. I started school in a two-room school,
Hmm.
and of course there were no white kids in the school. I also remember us and had to walk to school, and I remember white kids would pass on their buses and throw things at us as we
Wow.
walked along the road, and we'd have to jump the ditch or whatever, and and that was we just accepted that, it's what was done. But the realization of how things were as far as sharecropping came into my existence, or when I had begged my father to let me go with him to the market to sell tobacco, and we would always sharecrop with this gentleman and all the children. We had a big family, prepare the tobacco and everything, get it to go. And finally, he said I could go. I think I was about 10 or 11. And he said I could go. And so they had four big wagons there and all this tobacco on it. And I climbed up on it with my Uncle Smith. And we all went to the tobacco market. And when they took it down off the wagons, they put it on what they call the floor, the concrete. I had never seen a building that big in my life with all that tobacco in there. And it was the first time I'd ever heard what is called an auctioneer. An auctioneer auctions the price of the thing. Anyway, when they went down one side and they auctioned my dad's tobacco, I think my mind, I think it was like 18 cents or something like that per pound, 8 cents. Anyway, the same tobacco that we had worked in the same barns to prepare, when they came down, the sharecropper, the manager, the guy that owned the farm, his was like 10 cents more than
Wow.
ours. And so when they finally announced it, and they said sold for, I don't remember the numbers, 28 cents or something like that, right away I knew it was 10 cents more. And I began to scream at my father to tell him, Daddy, they made a mistake. This is wrong. They've done this wrong. And my Uncle Smith just scooped me up. He put his hand over my mouth and scooped me up and took me out of there and threw me up on the wagon and said, don't you open your mouth and you sit right here until we're ready to go. That stayed on my mind. It took me a while to learn exactly how that had happened. But that was my first experience with that kind of thing. You heard about it. They even made songs about stuff, how it was, it was done. But that was my first experience, I guess, with it. And so as I got to high school and then coming through that class, I found out that there were some atrocities, some riots. They called them riots, but actually they were murders of
Mm.
African American people in numbers in near where I lived, and also uh, where some of my relatives lived. So that sort of started to get my attention about how this thing was structured. And when as I said, I found about the Wilmington, North Carolina riot. They called it a riot, but it was an attack on African Americans there for a particular reason. And so when I got to college and started to dig a little deeper and found out that things weren't always as they seem, or even more atrocities that happened, um, I was sold, so to speak. And so I participated in those demonstrations the whole time I was there.
So while you were doing, participated in the riot, was there some feedback that came against you and other people because you did participate? Like, today, sir, we have Black Lives Matter. We saw how we were handled. Was it like that for you as well?
Well, it wasn't like a riot with us during my generation. Even though some of us got hurt, I got hurt.
Oh.
Uh, the we went downtown, and a lot of kids lined up. We were walking, and the first time I went downtown, I carried a sign. They had all kinds of people. Some were supposed to go into the facilities and sit down and ask for to be served. Others were supposed to walk around outside, singing or whatever, and carrying the signs. And the first day I was down there, and we had already been told that we could not, we had to be nonviolent if we were going to participate. As a matter of fact, the first gentleman who came to our campus to talk to us, we did a forum on it, was Floyd McKissick. I don't know if
Mm,
that name rings a bell with you, but he was one of the early ones, along with Dr. Martin Luther King. Of course, Dr. King never came to our campus in that time, but Floyd McKissick came and he laid out the rules. We could not fight back, and told us about what things that might happen to us and everything. And so when we got downtown, and on that first time that I went, um, I was pushed and shoved and spat on, and got spat right in my ear and my face. Uh,
mm,
they were cursing at us and jeering us, and we were to just keep doing what we were supposed to do, and we were never supposed to. We never missed classes. You could not go during your class time. You had
okay.
to be. You had to have not have a class on that particular day or that morning or whatever. And I was not necessarily one of the leaders. There were some other upperclassmen who were the leaders, and I know some of them. As a matter of fact, one of my homeboys was a leader of it. But the thing about it is that after a while, you got the feeling that somebody really hated you for some reason,
Wow. Okay.
and it was hard to understand, why that this was this way. Of course, we had heard stories. My uncle Jim,
Hmm.
who told us that he was not allowed to vote, and he went up to try to register to vote, and they told him that he had to count had to name the number of marbles in a jar before he could register. Others told us that they had to be able to say a particular part of the Constitution and the preamble and thing. Now we learned those things as we came through, but during their generations, they wouldn't have known that. Many of them were illiterate, could not read or write, and had to put X's on their forms and things like that.
Mm,
So it was a time when it was an awakening for me because I didn't know all this other stuff had gone on in the past. Uh, William Teal, the young man that was killed, sort of got our attention during
yeah.
that time.
Yes.
But but it was like that. It was a feeling of in a sense, it was a system that wanted you to feel inferior,
Yes.
no matter how what God had given you in your brain to be able to do.
Mhm.
You were supposed to feel inferior. And I will tell you one other thing from time. I had there was a young white boy that I grew up with. He was we were friends, I guess. But when we got to high school, of course, his father owned an insurance company, a big farm, and everything. And we got to high school, and it was time to take the test, the SAT.
Hmm.
And of course, we didn't take them together. They went to one place. I went to Fayetteville State University. It was where I took mine in the gym, the old Lilly Gymnasium. But when the scores came back, he saw me one day and he said, Ennis, we got to take that test over. And I'm saying, wait a minute, well, why would I take the test over? He said, we got to take the test over. And I said, I'm not taking that test over. And he said, well, you got to if you won't pass it. I said, really? I passed the test.
Right.
He said, no. And he became angry. He said, I know you didn't pass the test. And when he said these things, he said, we have better facilities. We have better things than you all do. And I know you can't pass that test. And I told him I passed the test. I told him I made 1,300 on the test. Yes, I did.
Hmm.
And he became very angry. That young man didn't speak to me for the next 10, 15 years. And
Really?
finally, one day he did come back to me because he had not passed the test. He finally got into East Carolina University and became a teacher and a coach the same as I did. But we had good role models during that time. We had good people encouraging us. Uh, I sort of followed in the footsteps of my high school coach, he became a championship coach, and then he became a city councilman, as I did. Coach Paul Williams, I give him a lot of credit. But our generation, I think, we had found out enough about it, what was happening, that we were willing to put our lives on the line to correct some of that.
Okay. Okay.
And some of the campuses were attacked by police. Of course, you all know about that. And where I am now is in South Carolina. And the year before I came here, the South Carolina kids were shot down over in Orangeburg at the South Carolina State University. were shot down, and then you had other places where the National Guard and so forth fired on the kids. But as far as the feelings that you get, I remember that when I was hit, I had never felt anger like that before in my life. And then I had pledged to be nonviolent,
Mm-hmm.
which was not my father's way.
Okay.
You see what I mean? My dad would retaliate, and he taught us to retaliate. But um, it was just one of those things. I've gone back through my mind many, many times, and there have been so many things that have happened that suggest that. And I can tell you this also. I'm my granddad now. And I remember one day, I have a granddaughter. She's 14, 15. Anyway, one day we were here and it was doing Black History Month or something, and something was on about it. And she asked me, uh, Granddaddy, why did they hate us so? What did we ever do to them? And I could not answer.
Wow.
And that's painful. So when
Yes.
Dr. Floyd McKissick stood in our auditorium at Fayetteville State University and challenged us to go out and do this, and he also told us, and I'm going to tell you, he said these words. He says, if you will do this now, he
Mm-hmm.
said, within your lifetime, you will see the election of an African American or Black president. And I was on the front row, and I remember him saying that. And in my mind, he
Wow.
lost me a little bit because in my mind, I said, maybe my great, 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 great grandchildren might see that.
Right.
But I never thought it would happen in my lifetime.
Mm.
So those are my generation, those of us who are in 75 and 80 and above that too. Uh, what is happening in the country now is not what we expected. We never anticipated that there would be a Black Lives Matter protest going on. And I know that other protests have gone on, and with the march when Dr. King went to Washington, I was still in college then.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it has been a pain to my generation, and we've talked about it. I've asked some of my friends. I mean, how do you feel about this thing? Anyway, I was in another forum one time up in North Carolina. Well, I was at a reunion really, and we started to talk about it. And something came to my mind. I was not there when my great great grandmother was raped. I was not there. I was not there when my great great grandfather was lynched or whatever happened to him. He was beaten, but I can feel the pain,
Yes. Yes.
and sometimes it wells up. As I said, like a mighty river. Sometimes you can feel the pain of it,
Yeah.
knowing what they went through, and worse, as African Americans had this experience in this country. So uh, it behooves us now to really wake up about where we are with this,
Mm-hmm.
because it really, I know that the Black Lives Matter incident, where the demonstration started with the murder of George Floyd.
Yes.
And
Yes.
for me personally, knowing that I grew up with his aunts and uncles, they were our friends. His dad, I knew him. Uh,
Wow.
they were, well, actually, they were from Clinton, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Now, his dad I think he was in the military for a while. So Floyd ended up out in the Midwest someplace, the young man that was killed. But I know them. I know his relatives. I knew his grandmother. As a matter of fact, when I went home one time to his grandmother's funeral, that little guy was about 7, I guess, 8. And I met him. So now it seems that every time we would turn around, there was been another killing, not just where he was. It was all this in South Carolina and
Yes.
other places. The Emmanuel Church down in Charleston, and took our grandkids down there to see that building where that massacre took place.
Yes. Yes.
I can feel the pain. This is something that is ingrained, and I thought at one time it had been lost with our generations coming. But the
Mm-hmm.
Black Lives Matters thing has convinced me that now there's another generation that picks up the mantle. And so I'm concerned. I'm happy about the recent elections and things that have surrounded that. Not happy about the insurrection or anything like that. But I think it's time now for this country to take an inward look, because together we stand, divided we fall.
Yes, sir.
We will not survive this kind of thing. As a matter, I want to tell you this: while that we were demonstrating, there
Hmm.
were people who were telling us to pick up arms. Uh, you're not old enough to remember these people, I know, but H. Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael, those violent guys who were encouraging us. As a matter of fact, one of them, a group of them, came to our campus with a bread truck full of guns. And during the time that we were there and we were demonstrating, the people were white people were coming on our campus and throwing smoke bombs and things like that. So it was really an experience. Yet we had to go back into class. We had to behave ourselves. We had to calm down and get our lessons. And so I'm proud to have been a part of that,
Yes.
and proud even more now to see that the Black Lives Matter situation, or this movement, has come about to hopefully get us over the hump. Now, as we said, we elected a Black president. Now we have a Black vice president. But the blood that has been shed from the time even that I was there to now has been tremendous. So not without blood have we come this far. It has been a bloody situation for our people.
Yes,
And
sir. Yes,
so
sir.
I'm happy to have an opportunity to be on a forum where we can express my generation and but for Marcus and um, Omika, I probably wouldn't be here. But there are others who will tell you the same thing. I mean, a lot of them who were beaten, injured during the time that we were going through that.
Wow. Well, we're going to take a commercial break. Wow, this is powerful, Mr. Brian. We're going to take a commercial break. We'll be right back, and we're going to hear some more of your story, because I have a couple other questions I want to kind of ask you about as we continue to talk about segregation. We'll be right back. Have you been enjoying the show? Make sure you comment and like. Tell us what you want to talk about. It might be featured on the next Real Talk with Jean Price.
In school, we were taught lessons about several European inventors and innovators like Leonardo da Vinci, Charles Darwin, Albert Einstein, Susan B. Anthony, Christopher Columbus, Abraham Lincoln, the list goes on. But I can never necessarily fit myself into the mold of these narratives solely because they were presented through a lens that I could not personally identify with, and they didn't feature individuals whose stories even vaguely resembled my own. Now, granted, we would learn about Dr. King and Rosa Parks when February rolled around out of the school's own obligation, but it gave me the impression that all people of color have been doing for these past few centuries is fight for their basic human rights and do nothing else but protest the white patriarchy, and that the world only held one man and one woman responsible for paving the way for the civil rights movement. I wasn't exposed to the idea that people of color in this country could be artists, inventors, or politicians.
Welcome back to Real Talk with Jean Price. I'm honored to have my guest with me, Mr. Ennis Bryant, who was part of the protests at one point during the 1960s. Welcome back, Mr. Bryant, to Real Talk with Jean Price. Oh, wow, you were really giving us some good insight in what it was like. You know, you said some powerful things that no matter what you went through, you had to make sure there was no violence. And we talked about, you know, even like we mentioned Black Lives Matter and still what it made you feel like inside. How did you get to the point that you became a high school principal?
Well, that's sort of a story too. It was I came into South Carolina actually in 1969 as a coach, and had planned to live in South Carolina just long enough to get my advanced degree, and was going to relocate to someplace else. But winning is contagious. Started to win games, basketball state championships. The first football championship at the high school I went to, I was involved with that. First boys basketball state championship, I won that. We had numerous regional championships, and But before I came here, I was actually in Virginia and had some success there in sports. But when I got to South Carolina, I saw a need. What I found out is that all of these athletic kids were not going anyplace. They weren't going to college. And
Okay.
so I began to try to encourage that and try to get them to attend college, to play sports and to use that as a vehicle to get their education. And so I began every year, I would make the round through the HBCUs that I was familiar with a load of kids, trying to get them into colleges. We went to Fayetteville State, of course. I went to Shaw and took some guys up to North Carolina Central and some other schools around just to give them the feel of it, the college campus, and was successful in having some kids go to school. And then, as far as the principalship is concerned, I spent some time in coaching. I felt that there were some things at the administrative level that I could address, having gone and completed the degrees that I wanted, and by that time, looking forward then to head toward retirement and all that. But ended up becoming the principal of the first African American principal at the Bishopville High School. That was in '93. And that's where, as time went on, I met a young man by the name of Marcus Benjamin. A lot of potential, and had to be. He'll tell you I had to be mean to him sometimes to draw that out. But I'm so proud of what he's been able to do. He and Omika. But the experience of being a principal, I felt so guilty that I could not. I didn't have the resources to offer the kids the things that I thought they needed to have. So we had to innovate. We had to, as a matter of fact, there was a ruling at one time that we had to offer African American history as a class. And so that we got that started. And many of the kids, we were able to get not only that, but we got an ROTC program here at the school. And that was a first. Giving some kids other opportunities through that program. So there have been things that, and I've been blessed, God has led me to the point that I could just almost ask and get things done. And then running for city council made a difference too. But as far as the high school experience, the principal experience, I began to see things in sort of a different way. Some schools in South Carolina were not as affluent, were districts, I would say, as affluent, didn't have the heavy industry, to support the schools. And those schools were dilapidated, falling down. The building that I was in fell down, literally. I came into school that morning and the kids were going to classes. It's an old building. And I was standing on my perch, as they say. I stand at the corner so I could see everybody moving about. And I heard a young lady, someone coming down the stairs, and the bell had sounded. The young lady popped out into the hallway, and I questioned her as to why she was late to class because the bell had sounded. She said that she had just finished a math test with the math teacher up there and had a pass, and she needed to go to her locker. Well, that was all against the rules. You're supposed to go to the locker and all that and be ready to go to class. So I stood there with her and I told her, okay, you get your books out of your locker. It was right there. And then you go to your class. She said, I'm going to my Spanish class. And she turned, I watched her go inside the door. The Spanish teacher opened the door, let her in. And I turned to go and back to my office, which was less than 20 feet from where I was standing. And as I entered the door of my office, I heard the worst sound. The building shook. And I ran back out into the hall and I saw nothing but dust, and I thought it was a fire. The whole second floor under the hallway had fallen down. And I pulled the fire alarm and kids got out. It was a blessing that we had some kids in the other building. There were kids out there and kids were going out windows in the front part. We assembled in the football field down there. And it was amazing because that building had been at one time condemned, but we were still there. And so that experience, knowing that our kids were at risk physically,
Right.
it sort of caused me to look at other things different because there had not been a referendum to build a school or anything like that. So when as a matter of fact, when I called, I knew the police chief and I mean the fire chief, and he came down and he came down when I pulled the fire alarm. He came down there and he thought the building had caved in on some kids, and we were fortunate as I had nightmares after that because if I had stood there and made that little girl stand there and talk to me longer, she would have been under that stuff.
That's right. That's
And
right.
so she went inside and was safe. But it sort of let me know then that there was there's a time for change, and as God would have it, change started to come. We got a
Mhm.
new superintendent who was pushing for schools, and eventually we built a new school. During the time that President Obama was running, and as he became president, he was elected. But anyway, a young lady from near us wrote a letter to him about her school. Now I
Mhm.
knew about that school. I thought it had been torn down years ago. But here's an eighth grade kid still in that school. And so, as you look at things like that, how far have we come?
Yes.
If
Yes.
a student that I went to school, when I went to school, could tell me that you don't have the facilities that I have, and I know you can't be as smart as I am enough to pass a test.
Right.
You
Right.
see, so sometimes that causes you to pause and think, where are we with this?
Right.
But through the years, there have been things, and I want to reflect back on one other thing from the 60s. When the Black Lives Matter protests began, it spewed over into Fayetteville, where I went to school. And they had a clip on TV, and this gave me chills when I saw it. In Fayetteville, North Carolina, there's a place in the middle of the street called the Slave Market. We've known about it for years. It's where they used to march people out on the balcony and sell them as slaves,
Mm.
knowing in some of my research that possibly some of my relatives were sold up on
Right.
that thing. But everybody's got his own story. But this impressed me, caught my eye. I was looking at the clip, and in 1963, when we were demonstrating around that thing, we wanted them to close it and tear it down, but they turned it into a police outpost. So when we went down there, police were all around the thing. But anyway, I stood and looked up at that thing. I was standing at the corner of Hay Street and another street that goes, but I was standing looking up at that building. And a young man whom I shall probably never know in that clip was standing in the same place that I stood 50 years before for the same reasons.
What?
Wow. Yes, I saw that. And I told my wife about it. I said, golly, we have not come so far. I guess if that kid is demonstrating for the same things, of course, we were demonstrating for the passage of the Civil Rights Act
Right.
and the Voting Rights Acts, but basically they were saying the same things.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I mean, even now I think about it, and I wish I had gotten a clip of that or something or some way. But he was looking up at the same monument that I was looking at, a monument that expressed racism,
Mm.
and for us, for African Americans, it was a disaster.
Right.
You see, I mean, for our experience, but people have, not taken the steps to remove it or anything like that. But and also, I just feel like while I was at Fayetteville State, we were pushing to have. We experienced later after I left, but the first African American commissioner came on board, who was a former college teacher of mine, and so we thought, or I thought, that we were overcoming.
Mhm.
See what I
Right.
mean? Never to experience anything like that again. Never would there be a child who would be standing in the same spot that I was standing in '63 and looking up at that building. So we need to rethink this thing. We're going to have to come together as a country. Otherwise, we're not going to be a country.
That's right. That's right. Mr. Brian, I have 4 grandsons and 2 granddaughters, and one day the grandchildren were over at my house, and my 3 grandsons went to ride their bike around the corner. There was a security area in the park by the school, and there was some Chinese kids playing, and my 3 grandsons. They made my grandsons leave the park. And when my grandson, one of them came back, he didn't want to say anything about it. We were like, but my daughter picked up on it and they went over to the park, so forth. And my grandson that came back, he said he didn't want any smoke. Now I'm trying to understand. I don't know what that means. But what he was saying, because I'm just not into all that. But what he was saying to me, and he was a 10 at the time, he was saying that there was another level of fear that gripped them, because they felt afraid because they were made to leave the park. And to your point, if we don't do something different, the next generation, or at least my three grandsons from 11 to 14, they're going to keep experiencing what you experienced, you said 50 years later, that young man looked up, he experienced. And I'm as you're talking to me, is so many things are running through my head. What can we do, or what can we continue to do to help that next generation?
First of all, knowledge is power.
Yes,
And
sir.
they have to know, and even in this state now, they're talking again about placing African American history as courses in the schools. A picture of it, and so this young man who the grandson later became a pastor and minister, and when some of the destruction of the KKK happened, it left a building there. It's in Lawrence, South Carolina. You can look that up.
Wow.
And he was fortunate enough to be able to buy that building, and now he wants to turn it into an educational building for future generations to know about their history
Yes,
and
yes,
that kind of thing. So every I think that every community, every school system, every town, they ought to have an African American history museum, however
yes.
small. Now we know that the big things are happening down in Charleston, and a great mayor down there, a former mayor, is putting that together to have it happen in Charleston. In other places, there's been an attempt here, even in this small county, to have one together. They've sort of spread it around us, but there is a history that needs to be known.
Mm-hmm.
Back to this issue of the Lawrence situation, a young man, a young white boy, who found out about that, and he stood there, and I just saw this. I think it was this morning. He stood there. Now I knew about Lawrence, but he had no idea that that had ever happened. So he's pitching in now to give aid to this preacher to try to turn that thing into something much like the Martin Luther King thing that happened down in Atlanta. Well, when you do stuff like that, I've always wondered why it is when you're trying to do something good that you get so much opposition,
Yes,
and
yes.
so you get opposition for that. But I think that uh, the rhetoric that's flying around and about the political things and all of that, something like that, education is knowledge,
Yes.
and if you can convince these young people that they're worth.
Mm-hmm.
I run another story by you, and Marcus Benjamin can attest to this. Probably some it came right after his generation of high school. The largest prison around anywhere is here in this county, and it was built. As a matter of fact, they built two of them. Not here, one's over in the other county. But they built pure prisons and just let them sit there because by the third grade, they knew approximately how many of our kids were going to end up in the prison. So
Jeez.
when I spoke to a group of young men when I was a consultant with the school, and I told them that prison is not being built for me, for my generation. It's being built for your generation because they see you coming. You
Mm.
see, somebody sees you coming and knowing that it's going to be profitable to someone if there's a prison to house you. And some of those young men have come back and have attested to the fact that, I was the first person to speak at one of the graduations at that prison when they had a graduation with the African American population in there. I thought it'd be a bunch of, African American guys graduating. There were only 5 out of about 40 something in those classes. So that disturbed me that we've got to put the money at the front end.
Yes,
If we
sir.
put the money at the front end in the lower grades and start to groom and show these kids that we care in education about their futures, I think we can put a dent into it. But instead, even you know, with people down here now, we have the lottery, but a lot of the lottery money is not going into education. It's called an education lottery, but that's not where it's going.
Right.
So there are things that that communities can do and organizations working together can do to try to head this thing off, because it bothers me each time I pick up the paper and I see here's another young man shot at, you know, uh, for this and that, and it's usually a black face. Now, there's one thing about the COVID. COVID doesn't care about what color you are.
That's right.
That it's you know,
Right. Doesn't discriminate.
that's
Right.
right. It
That's
is. So I look at it that way. If we can start to put together some programs to impact the kids at the early level, the experience that I had with the charter school here, I had never worked with little kids. I was always a high school principal, you know, coach, principal, and everything. I'd never worked with the little ones, but that is where I came to know that this is where we're missing it.
Yes.
We're not doing some things that we need to do at those early grades. All of the programs, no matter what. Let's not do a moonshot. One moonshot would solve the problem, I guess, or a space shot would probably solve the problem. So areas like where we live here and where Marcus was born and raised, and I coached his uncle. um, Places like this suffer because there's no heavy industry, nothing coming in to you know, sort of build the community up. So it takes a lot of work from agencies and within the community.
Wow. Well, Mr. Bryan, you have definitely enlightened us tonight on what segregation was in the 60s, helping us to see that it's still here in the 2020 and 21. And I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you for your sacrifice for going and rioting without violence, of course, in the 60s and keeping it going as far as teaching about education, taking Bishop Marcus Benjamin, taking other young men, allowing them to see that they're even though we are dark colored people, but yet we have so much inside of us. So for even our viewing audience that's listening to us and watching us, we would like to take this time to say thank you. Thank you for all that you've done and all that you're still doing. Just being that voice. And I love it because silence gives people the indication that we're ignorant, and we're not ignorant. Thank you for being the voice. And thank you for teaching us to be the voice. And again, we would love for you to come back on the show. We would like to continue to find out the different things that's going on down where you live. And again, here where we live, I'm in New York. So again, thank you, sir. Thank you for all that you've done. You've definitely enlightened us with what you've gone through. And I'm so grateful that you came out of it with a humble heart. And I'm grateful for that tonight.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. I've said many times that were it not for the discrimination or whatever, who's to know that some young black boy or girl could not have solved the problem of the common cold, yet not given an opportunity. That's
right. That's right. Well, listen, viewing audience, we want to thank Mr. Ennis Bryan for being with us tonight. A man with wealth and knowledge. And I like what he said tonight. Knowledge is power. That was good. So join us next week on Real Talk with Jean Price. If you want to go back and see this interview again, it was absolutely powerful. Please go back, do a replay, do a watch party, and watch it again. Thank you again for being with us tonight on Real Talk with Jean Price.